before I said my students, we can say that, they had, Keisha and Donnell were on the student board, and they were amazing leaders on that board, and it's kind of fun to have them mix with the current board to pass on some of the things they learned and some of that history. And the giving of this prize is part of that. But before I came to Columbia, I was at INSEAD for about five years. I forget what year, Lucy, we actually met. Was that 2004? So I just pretty fresh to the to INSEAD at that time. And it's a school. I love Columbia, of course, but I do have a special place in my heart for INSEAD. I think it's an amazing school and amazing students. Only 10% of the students come from any country. So the U.S. did not dominate, which is always a good experience for Americans to be put in their place. And it was great discussions, and high quality students and high quality faculty. I taught the governance class there. It's a class I enjoyed, and I've learned more about these issues since. But we had a number of cases to teach, and the cases go over the classic stuff. And there's one case about Anglo-American, or was it called? In South Africa. So we didn't talk about this earlier, but you knew what I was going to talk about. And in a business school, we teach a lot of numbers, which is great. We all like numbers. It's easier to teach. Probably don't know that numbers than anything else. And the students go for it, and they were doing the NPV estimation of whether or not this company should extend health coverage to the family, to the partners of those workers who were covered by health. And of course, that's an astronomical figure. It explodes very quickly as a health charge. And there was a lot of discussion. What should the board do? Of course, the board can't bankrupt the company, et cetera. And then Lucy stood up and said, this is just ridiculous as a way to frame the question. You have to frame if I remember, you correct me, Lucy, if I'm wrong, but she said, this is first and above all a human question. And we have to work out the commitment to these people. And Lucy was emotional to it, and I think the class got emotional to it. And it's because it was emotional that stayed with me, and I bet stayed with everyone in that particular classroom. It's one of those moments you just, as an instructor, as a professor, you just wait for those kind of moments where everything comes together and it becomes clear what this whole thing is about. And the HIV is a big thing, and the pharmaceutical companies were not behaving well, and there had to be some things done at that time. So Lucy comes from Ghana and from, I think, the UK, both. Last night we talked about some issues along with Jim Rogers and other people about one generation from a farm and coming in, and Jim Rogers actually has a similar background, and it's kind of an interesting comparison. The importance of education in the family, how her grandfather particularly brought in education to them. Maybe, Lucy, you can talk about these things. She's an engineer. She got a degree, which is great. And she got this while being at the UK itself. I remember, I don't think I knew at that time that Lucy was married and had a child. She carried on with everything else like everyone else did. She worked for a number of companies afterwards, among Millicom, Vodafone. She went back to Ghana and became the head of Airtel Ghana. I used to go to India an awful lot, and Airtel would always show up on my telephone as I popped in. And I said, oh, this is interesting. Now it's Airtel Ghana. So there's also a story about an Indian multinational coming to Africa, which is so vital. It's also about a woman leading up a large multinational operation. Just really honored to have Lucy here, and it's a real opportunity to get your view on this topic. Thanks so much, Lucy. You can go up there, or your choice.
Thank you very much, Bruce. I think I'm going to sort of hang around here because when you're sitting down there, the lectern looks so big. I have a feeling I might get lost there, and then you won't remember that I was here. So I'll hang around here a bit, and I'll just pop my notes over here. And if I refer to them so be it. But I'm going to follow in what I've come to understand is the way you, Sir Robin's laughing, is the way you start a speech. I've noticed here that when people are starting off, they don't just say, I'm Lucy Quist and I work for Airtel Ghana Limited, and it's one of the big telecoms companies in Ghana, but also it's one of the top 3 globally, Indian multinational, and I'm the head of the business, the managing director. But I've noticed that that's not enough, so I've said that bit. I also have to say the bit of, so I'm from Ghana. I'm from the UK as well because I was born there. Both of my parents are Ghanaian. For those of you who don't know where Ghana is, it's in West Africa. There are 27 million people. And I'm glad to see some reps from Ghana who have come to support me. In addition to my friend Robin, who's a New Yorker, my brother-in-law Anton, and Jeffrey and Nana Prempeh. So thank you to all of them for coming so far out to be here, and thank you to everyone else who is here today to hear this. I recall when Bruce initially got in touch to talk to me about this today, about this talk, and it was at the height of the US primary elections, and we had a bit of banter back and forth in our emails. Well, today, I believe that the world and America, led by America, on this particular issue is living in a new reality. And when I think about that reality, I recognize the fact that people like me are not qualified to comment on that reality so much. But what I can say is that those of us who are not Americans are actually watching this reality very closely. And the communication that this is putting out is not lost on any of us. And it's fair to say that many people are re-evaluating the role of this current American reality in their own lives and in their own businesses. And I thought that was worth sharing. For me, I think that what was really interesting about the election and all the debates is rather the subtle messages around business that I think weren't debated as much as they could have been, but the messaging around particularly business integrity and by an extension, trust. I think there were some comments that were made that left people like me in business thinking, do business leaders really get to say that and get away with it? I'm still in shock. I'm still surprised because I think it's still not being debated, but that's where we are today. So I want to extend a very big thank you to Bruce for having me here, for all his instruction. As he mentioned, I can get a bit emotional when it comes to issues that really matter to me. However, today I'm going to share with you a bit around my more personal perspective on what it means to be a business person and how to address the issue of trust, particularly in restoring it. Now, I'm going to read this bit because I had to obviously prepare and I had to do some research. I thought, let me really find out what is going on out there. And I know that Bruce mentioned the Edelman Trust Barometer, which he hadn't told me he was going to talk about. But I was very surprised to read that trust in business as a whole is improving in the general population, with 53% of respondents saying they expressing trust in businesses and NGOs and civil society. The media and government recorded the lowest scores at 47% and 43%. And even though at 53% business is doing better, that still means that 47% of the population does not trust us. I think it's fair to say that there's been somewhat an inversion between the trust and the influence that CEOs and heads of businesses have. And so the report went on to talk about the fact that the issue is compounded according to Edelman's reports, by the fact that peers, employees, technical and academic experts have more credibility than CEOs, board members, board directors, and government officials and regulators. So I think it's evident that the people that we traditionally trusted to be the voice of reason and the voice of our own well-being, we no longer wholeheartedly want to trust, or trust for that matter. Many years ago, I was a young student, as Bruce highlighted, and I was very fortunate to be a sponsored student of Ford Motor Company. And what that meant was that not only did I get some form of bursary, but I also got a lot of practical engineering training throughout my studies. So of course, it became the #1 company that I wanted to work for when I graduated. Because by that act of engaging me long before I was even going to be profitable to the company, I had already established a certain degree of trust in the company. And I thought this was a company that I could entrust at least my early career with. And so I was very delighted when, at the end of my studies, I got through the assessment center and made it into the company. And what ensued was a number of years of structured professional development that made you think that you belonged to an organization that had a structured plan for you, that was working in your best interest, both as an employee but also as a stakeholder in general, for your well-being and your success and your progress. So when I fast forward to today's world, and I hear stories like VW and stories like Wells Fargo, they shock me. They shock me particularly when I think of VW, because I, for the life of me, as a trained engineer who has worked on vehicle production, cannot understand how it's even possible to have a test result and not put it on the table, or to put it on the table and decide to ignore it. I think a lot has changed, because in my time in the industry, I just don't see how that would have been possible. So what's happened to us? These old companies who were the bastion of truth and the bastion of trust and the bastion of forming people in those cultures to become business leaders, what's happened along the way? The truth is, I don't know. I don't know what's happened to these companies. But I'd like to take us into my current world to perhaps make some suggestions around what could have possibly happened. For the last 8.5 years, I've worked in telecoms in 3 companies across the continent of Africa. And it is an industry that, by all accounts and purposes, has done a huge amount of good for the continent. Today, mobile penetration is at 47%, and the figures of the correlation between mobile penetration and economic development are clear for all to see. But it is an industry that is constantly under a huge amount of pressure when it comes to trust. Fundamentally, we have an issue where we're not trusted enough, not as much as we'd like to be. And so I spent some time trying to look at why would we be doing so much good for the society, for economic development, and find ourselves in a position where we have to work so hard to be trusted. When I looked into it, a number of things became relatively obvious and could somewhat perhaps explain some of what was going on. You see, in the early years of telecoms on the continent, some of the licenses were bought as assets to hold. Right? Some of these licenses were bought in the hope that in a few years they could be flipped for a profit. Then the industry started growing, and it looked like, maybe there's some profit to be made here. And so then business connected with government and regulators. And what then ensued was a series of breaks, which were necessary for the investments to be made, but then breaks that later on the governments and the regulators turned to resent. You see, when you're entering into an agreement with someone, you fundamentally need to understand as much of their position as you possibly can. And when you don't understand their position and you go along and you make an agreement, what then happens is that you suddenly feel as though they cheated you, even if they didn't intend to. You feel cheated even if they didn't, just for lack of information. What has happened then is that by the communication of governments, of regulators, repeatedly bombarding our customers with the notion that somehow the investments are ripping them off, they've also bought into it. Now, if a company legitimately makes an investment and legitimately makes a profit that they then intend to legitimately reward their shareholders with, why shouldn't they be trusted? And so the perception and the communication and the information asymmetry put together actually put us in an extremely perilous position. As business people in telecoms, we're constantly faced with the need to reaffirm and re-engage and continually earn that trust. But here's the issue: how do you earn someone's trust? For a moment, I want you to think of someone you trust. Anybody. Anybody at all. Business, at home. And I want you to hold on to that person's name, because I'll come back to that in a moment. So, in my career in telecoms, and particularly more recently since I've been in charge of Airtel in Ghana, I set about to try to at least address some of these issues. Now, the starting point for large corporations on the continent has been, well, maybe if we put someone who's competent and credible, of course required of leadership, and has integrity, but is local enough that the people can recognize, that will start to help some of our credibility. And so people like me were put into these positions. And I believe that as an outset, it definitely helped. People were really excited. People said a lot of nice things when I was put in this position 2.5 years ago. But I quickly discovered that that is simply not enough. It's not enough to look the part. And it's not enough to hope that somehow you say the right things. I think that as leaders, as business leaders, to really come across as trustworthy, we have to connect with the people that we serve. Whether it's the people within our organization or whether it's the customers that we serve, they have to feel us as more present. And so I set about on a task of not just being present from a business point of view, but also personally being present from a corporate social responsibility point of view. Because typically with what happens with social responsibility is that we receive a long list of requests and a long list of what people want, and we dole out some money and we say thank you very much, see you next time. But what people want is not brick and mortar of an organization and a letter with a check. They want to see companies that have real people that can be trusted. And so it became imperative to actually step outside and be present in as many locations, as many regions, and ensure that my teams and their teams also did the same. Because you can't be credible on a hill. You have to be credible where the people can feel your presence. You have to be the voice that they expect to hear when they need to feel that their company is with them. Now, a very interesting thing happened as a result of this going out, and trust me, it's completely exhausting to have to want to connect with so many customers constantly. And you have to have some routines about it to deliver on it. But what happened, which I'm sure I think the marketing panel would be quite amused to have heard, is that After a year or so, we went back into the market and we did our regular brand tracking evaluations, NPS, man mark the company and the brand. And we asked people what they actually thought of the company. And we asked them to then describe the company. And what came out was very amusing, but somewhat personally alarming. It was amusing because it was nice to see that customers had really understood and connected with what we were doing. What we were doing from our brand strategy point of view, our product strategy, our corporate social responsibility, the communication we were putting out. They had heard us. But when customers had to describe our company as a person, the alarming thing was they described me. Now, this is alarming because obviously, if you're not there, then who are they going to describe? Which inevitably will happen. But the big lesson in that is the fact that people don't look at companies as just a name. Not anymore. Not in this age when information is available. Not in this age when they just need to go on Facebook and find out about a company. They're still looking for representation of a company. Who represents what this company stands for? And do I believe in this person who represents this company? And it's alarming because no one can actually perfectly deliver on that. So it's a huge responsibility. But here's the thing. That person you thought of that you trust, and this is genuinely an open question, so please do respond. Why do you trust that person? Anybody care to share? The track record. Okay. Kathy? Okay. Okay.
I'm thinking about my
Your parents. Anyone else? Yes. Okay. I think what's fascinating is that if we go around this room, we will come up with very similar answers. And we would also come up with answers, perhaps 50-50. Half of them would be like the gentleman like your answer, which is more an unspoken trust, one that you can't articulate, but it's there, especially if it's like a parent. And if it's someone you work with, then it's probably they have demonstrated a long track record of being trustworthy. And so I asked the question, why do we think that business leaders are any different? What makes us assume that the fundamental drivers of trust for us as human beings are different when we deal with business leaders? Because there's some business leaders we trust just because we trust them, right? We can't really explain it, but there's something about her, there's something about that guy that makes them trustworthy. And there are others that we trust because they've done some work consistently, or we've worked with them and they've demonstrated trust. But when you think about these two sides of trust, can we fathom the enormity as a human being of sustaining trust? The enormity of the responsibility of sustaining trust? It's huge. It's huge to be trusted in the first place, but it's even bigger to be able to sustain that trust. And so Today, when we talk about restoring trust, I think that the bigger responsibility is to ask ourselves, how do we sustain the trust that people already have in us? Because it's the complacency around being trusted that leads to us breaking the trust and having to work hard to earn it. If I asked again around this room and I said, if of the people you trust, if they broke your trust, what would it take for you to trust them again? I suspect majority would be able to enumerate reasons, but also deep down say, but I still keep an eye on him somehow. Right? And that, therefore, is our challenge. Our challenge is that we need to go back to teaching business leaders that actually trust is more fragile than we realize. That trust isn't all because you look nice and you sound nice and you're the smartest person in the room and you've done so much to be trustworthy. That trust is sometimes emotional. And the problem is that if you take that trust for granted just because you have positional power, it could cost you very dearly. Because then we can talk about, walk the talk. We can talk about holding people accountable. All the wonderful things we read about, right? Those are doable. But how many times have you read and seen and heard that and still not trusted the person? How many times have people worked really hard for you to believe that they're trustworthy and you still look at them like that? We must go back to our fundamental instinct, and our instinct is that we want to be trustworthy and we want to trust others. And so let's respect trust and treat it as something that actually needs to be as guarded as keeping up with the latest trends and keeping up with, what's going on in the world around us and what are the predictions on Wall Street and what are the global. We need to treat trust as something that really needs to be carried all throughout. I loved literature when I was in school. I forced myself to read. I liked literature, but I didn't like the need having to read reams and reams of information just to be literate. And one of my favorite books was Macbeth, Shakespeare. And so I'd like to, for those of you who know Shakespeare, but if you don't, you'll still get it anyway. And I can't remember whether it's Cawdor or Cowder, so forgive me. But it's from Macbeth, Act 1, Scene 4. And this is the king, King Duncan, talking to Malcolm. It's one of my absolute favorite scenes. And King Duncan says to him, "Is the execution of Cawdor done? Are not those in commission yet returned?" To which Malcolm responds, "My liege, they are not yet come back, but I have spoke with one that saw him die, who did not resort that very frankly he confessed his treasons, implored your highness's pardon, and set forth a deep repentance. Nothing in his life became him like the leaving it. He died as one that had been studied in his death, to throw away the dearest thing he owed, and 'twere a careless trifle." Now, here comes the kicker for me. King Duncan says, "There's no art to find the mind's construction in the face. He was a gentleman on whom I built an absolute trust." I think that what the king is sharing with us is that actually, when we take that trust for granted and we break it, we may not be able to retrieve it. So let's sustain and keep trust going. Thank you. Yes.
All right, Lucy, my name's Anton Quist, same last name, brother-in-law. So the last time I was in Ghana was in March, and I doubt things have changed. So I'd like to paint a picture of what it's like within the first 5 or 10 minutes after leaving the airport in Accra. You will see a billboard for your company with your face on it. That hasn't changed, has it? No. And in spite of there being, I think you have a comedian as a spokesperson, it seems from what you just said that people consider the company, you to fully be the person who represents the company.
Yes.
Now, looking at speakers today and looking at the nation as a whole, it is no different in Ghana. And I have to just bring this up. There are very few women in your field at the upper echelons of telecoms or any of the industries. It's the same in Ghana as it is here.
Yes, yes.
So this is an open-ended question.
Oh dear.
Because I could be more specific about it. But what does it mean with you representing the company and you, if I'm correct, being the only woman doing so?
What does it mean? Okay, so I think to give a shortish answer, it was the first time a Ghanaian woman had been put in charge of a telecoms company anywhere in the world. And subsequently, 2 other companies have followed suit, and we have 2 other women, but they're not Ghanaian. I think it fundamentally, for most people, represents what we're talking about today, trust. Because the direct response to having a Ghanaian woman in charge was to say that this company suddenly believes in quote unquote us. And this company is suddenly listening to us. It's a multinational company, and multinational companies around the world have a tendency to focus on their own nationals to run their companies for quite a while before they get into the local environment. But it also means a much weightier responsibility. Because when people haven't seen someone like that in the position before, they always have at the back of the mind a question of, can this person really do the job? It's a fact. And so you do have a responsibility, or I have a responsibility to go the extra mile to demonstrate. And I think more than anything else, the trust element comes into it because you have to be able to uphold your own personal integrity that got you there. The burden of it is that people who expect you to behave a certain way and are not able to get access to you in that behavior, and I'll be more specific, people who, for instance, maybe want to make a deal, and I say, well, my door's closed if you want to make a deal, but it's open if you want to talk about proper business, then say, oh, knew we shouldn't have put her there, she's just too difficult. She just won't let us have these conversations. You have to be able to live with that. And equally, that means that sometimes your conversations are not popular, but you put your foot down and you keep going because you cannot afford to undermine that trust even once. Yes.
So that it's more than just a face, and that they really feel this is one of us. And what about being a returnee?
Okay, interesting question. In terms of local languages, I actually speak 2. I speak Twi and I speak Ga because my parents are from different parts of the country. And Darnell made a great point about going in to engage the people. When I first got to Ghana in 2008, I was very frustrated, to be honest with you. And my frustration was the fact that I felt that people were not embracing my, what's it called, magic wand, is how I like to describe it. Because when people return to countries and they think that they're there to help, they expect that they show up and they have a magic wand and they go, change, 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 and everything just happens. And my wand didn't work, so I was in great shock. And I remember having a conversation with a young man in a company, driver, because I wanted to understand where people were coming from and why was I speaking Greek? I don't speak Greek, but I was speaking something they didn't get. And he said to me, and I always quote him exactly as he said it to me. I don't try to paraphrase. He said to me, Madame, if you want anything to work, you're going to have to get into the gutter with the people. Those were his words. And I repeated it, I replayed it just like that to many people. Because what he was saying to me is that, if you're going to affect anything, if you're going to be effective and you're going to be an effective leader, you have to connect with the people that you're trying to lead. You have to make them feel that you understand and you live enough of their reality so that what you propose is workable. And so I took his advice very seriously. Your question started on local language. It helps a lot when you're trying to speak to people on the ground, on the streets, the person selling on the street, the person in the market, the person who's remote. People somehow connect with you better if they think you can at least say something to them on your term, on their terms. However imperfect it is, you have to go to them as opposed to them having to come to you if you want to be a change leader. Any other questions? Yes, Ruben.
So you took us through that trust is important. Perhaps we're wanting to understand what are the building blocks? Because as leaders, you're not just local leaders, you're global leaders. And you mentioned that language is important, being able to get in the gutter with the people. But how do we do that on a global scale? How do you build trust, not just for your own market, but your global market?
I think the starting point of building any form of trust is your own personal value system, right? Trust starts with you. And we can go through all the academic competence, character, but the whole thing put together has to be you. And I think that's why I try to emphasize the bit around allowing people to think about people they trust, because what I'm finding is that the building blocks that make a person trustworthy they're under threat. We've talked about, is it a deliberate foul? Is it one that, and I'm listening to all this and I'm saying, when did we get into these shady areas? When was it that it's kind of gray? So the fundamental is that just as everybody can quickly think of who they trust and why they trust that person, it applies to me too, and it applies to everyone in this room. So the first start is this personal, being able to hold your own. So do you trust yourself? First question. Second is the people that you lead and the fact that you can connect with them and be consistent around demonstrating, living that trust, and holding people accountable when they don't meet your expectations. I think when you talk more globally, the challenge becomes, how do you translate and contextualize trust, right? Because I'll be very honest with you. If my son came to me and he said to me that, oh, I did this and it helped us win the game, but I couldn't, I would be mortified. I'll be horrified. Right? And then he'll remind me how, you're a bit too old, that's why you think like that. And then I'll give him a lecture and then, hopefully. But how do we deal with the contextualization of trust? I think that's a much more difficult thing, and which is why I say that those building blocks and pillars of character, competence, the integrity that underlie, those things you need to hold yourself to, because those things are absolute, and I believe that they're transferable to anywhere in the world. It can't be that it's half a lie. It's either a lie or it's the truth. It can't be that it was almost a handball. Did your hand touch it or not? And those things are universal. And I think that's what it means. But I understand that business leaders are under pressure. And I understand, to your point that you made earlier, that people feel that, if everybody's doing the wrong thing, I can't really be the guy to go on about, be the guy. Honestly, I've been that woman many times. And I think when it comes down to it, what I have experienced is that my reputation around corporate governance today has come to matter more than anything, any other skill, any other form of competence that I have. Yes, people hire you because they hear you, you know stuff and you can do stuff and you understand stuff. But when it comes down to it, now people will talk more about the fact that you can't run this past Lucy, and no, she won't have that, and you can trust the governance structures in the organization before they will talk about a great a commercial business strategy. And I think that every business leader should aspire to be able to be told that they hold their corporate governance and that their trustworthiness to that highest esteem, and they will not break it, not for all the profit in the world. Yes.
I appreciate you've been discussing and your ideas and philosophy. Now, I'm going to ask something. It's like a rhetorical question, so I don't expect you to answer it unless you want to. But knowing how important trust is, how is it that in our United States we had two prominent, eminent candidates running for president who were not trusted and are still not trusted?
I will answer that question actually. And I will, because I've been absolutely fascinated. So in our house, we have 3 children. We have my 12-year-old son, my 11-year-old niece, and my 10-year-old younger son. And for the life of me, every time we talk about the US elections, I know they're kind of young, but we like talking about stuff. It was interesting listening to them. And the bottom line, to summarize all those discussions over all these weeks, months really, is that we have left the general population very confused. They're very confused. I talk to my children and they argue both sides. Seriously, they argue both sides. And they're little children. So the issue is this, where is it? Is it that I can have a version of the truth and you can have a version of the truth and we version each other along? Or is there something? Because what I struggled with is to be able to look at them directly and say, you're completely wrong. Because in each case, they had this thing about, oh, but this person told a lie and this person did that and that one did that. We need to, honestly, I have a job to do. I think business leadership has a job to do. We need to understand what's true, what's right, what's wrong, and stick with the script and not allow this. So that's my answer. My children have left me scratching my head thinking, how do I get them to now understand and realign and reshape their thinking around what it means to be a trusted leader?
Thanks very much.
Thank
That's
you.
great.